Hey everyone, welcome back to our UIKit series, and today we're taking a look at networking in UIKit. So this image that I currently have on the phone is just a random image of the internet. I'm using a really cool website that actually just allows me to grab different random images from a JSON file. We're going to be taking a look at async and await in UIKit for cleaner, more efficient code. So traditional networking in UIKit often relied on closures and delegates, leading to really complex nested code. Some would refer to this as callback hell. And instead, we can just use things like async to make sure that we properly are loading, as well as handling any error cases if the URL is invalid, if the user isn't connected to the internet, right? Async await is a super clean approach. So there's no more callbacks. The await keyword pauses execution until the request completes. It's much easier on the error handling, and it is cleaner, way more readable code. So we can see here we have a JSON handler that we'll be creating. We also have our view controller here. Look how easy and little coding we actually need to do. I love async images and await. It is so great. Let's go ahead and dive on in to see how we can use this, or how you can use this in your own app for loading any remote images, information, profile pictures, and things like that. Let's go ahead and dive on in. So I'm creating a new Xcode project from scratch, but always feel free to include this in any project you're currently working on. I'm going to call this one async example UIKit. Storyboard Swift. All right, the first thing I'm going to show you is how to grab an image from a URL and display that. There's a really nifty tool we'll be using called Picsum, and I've used it in a previous video. So let's go ahead and create a new file from template here. I'm going to choose the Cocoa Touch file class, and let's go ahead and call this one imageview controller. So this is where we're going to be grabbing that image from the URL. So right under our class and before our view did load, let's go ahead and create a let for our image view. And let's just have this equal a UIImageView. We don't need anything within the parameters. And within our function of viewDidLoad, we'll create a function here called setupUI that's essentially going to add the UI elements to our screen. We're going to get an error, doesn't exist yet. So let's go ahead and create that function of setupUI, nothing within the parameters. And here's where we'll add the image view. We can add this within a frame. I like to use the CG rect. From here, add the X, Y, width, and height. Play around with these numbers. I'm going to set mine to be 50, 100, and then I'll do 200 by 200. Perfect. Then in our image view.content mode, this is where we can change how it kind of fills with the different aspect ratio. You might have different results. I'm going to do scale aspect fill. So this should fill it to the size of the view. You might want to fit it. Different images, might call for different scenarios. Then we're going to add a subview of the image view so it gets populated on the screen. Okay, next we're going to handle fetching the image. So let's create a function called fetchImage. And within the brackets, we're going to be saying that this image is going to be coming from a URL string. Right? This is something that we're going to be grabbing off the internet, or if you have like somebody's Discord link of like their photo or something, whatever the URL is going to go here, and it's going to conform to a string value. Outside of these brackets, we're going to go ahead and say async throws, and we're going to return with our little arrow here, so dash and then like the little greater than symbol, UIImage. Now we can add our brace. And this is where we're going to be using a guard let statement to ensure that the URL is valid. So guard let URL equals URL string conforms to the URL string. Else, a brace here, we're going to throw the URL error dot bad URL. So this is some built-in functionality that is going to prevent a URL request that's not available from being initiated. So it's kind of like a little safety measure. Okay, outside of this bracket, but we're going to make sure that we're still within the function here. We're going to go ahead and have a little bit of data, and this is where we can perform the network request asynchronously. So let, and then in brackets data, comma, underscore. You might want to put a space before the underscore here. You might get some weird errors. Equals try await URLSession dot shared dot data from, we're going to reference our lowercase URL. Next, let's convert any data into a UI image. So guard let image equals UI image. And then we're going to pass through the data, which is just our data that we've created above. On an else statement, add a brace, throw the URL error, and instead of the dot bad URL, we're going to do the dot cannot decode raw data. So this says content data received during a connection request could not be decoded for a known content encoding. So this should also make sure that, you know, if I'm trying to put in something that's not an image or wouldn't fit in a UIImageView, we'll at least get out of there and we'll kind of make sure that that case is handled. If I'm linking to like a website, that's not really going to conform into a UIImageView and what it can kind of handle, right? You can see here we do have an error. So right before the last brace, we need to then return an image. We're using an image view after all. Okay, that's it. And in order to provide it with a URL, let's go into our override function view.did_load. Let's kind of tab that over there a little bit. And because we're using async, we're going to be using task. And this is basically a unit of asynchronous work. So after our task, let's go ahead and add our braces. And this is where we're going to be adding a do, as well as a catch to prevent any errors. Let's go ahead and start off with the do. Some people like to add their do and catch, almost like an if-else statement. So the do, we're going to have let image equals try await fetch image from. So we're going to be using this function that we created down here. And this is where we can include a URL. If you're getting this from a different variable, feel free to do so. I'm going to go ahead and use this really cool website here called Picsum.photos. This will be available in the chat below, but essentially this is just random images, and all you have to do is grab the URL, and you can even adjust the size. There's some pretty cool things. There's even IDs for specific images. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this URL, and even if you want to open this link in a new tab, right, you can kind of see we get a random image. If we were to open it in a new tab again, instead of the skybox, we now have someone farming, right? So every time we kind of load this site, we're going to be grabbing a new image unless we add the ID. So I'm going to go back into Xcode. I'm going to make this a string, and this is the URL that we're going to be using. Afterwards, we're going to use a dispatch queue.main.async. We're going to include our code. And we're going to make sure that the image view is updating with that image. So we're going to use self.imageview.image equals image, right? When we look back where we're returning the image, that's what we're essentially inputting there. After the do, so you might have to move 2 brackets down, we're going to include a catch, which also needs its own braces. And this is where we're going to include our print statement of failed to load image. And we can also include the error. So after the string, we're going to do comma error. And this will kind of print the reason why, invalid URL, you know, if there's something wrong with it, we'll kind of figure out as to why that is the case. Okay, cool. Let's go to our main storyboard here and click on our view controller. And under the custom class, let's make it our image view controller. And we can go ahead and load this up and see how it works. Okay, and we can see that it loaded up this picture of the guitar. This is something from the internet, right? All we basically said is, hey, grab this picture from this URL. And what's really cool, you don't have to use the Picsum at all. I grabbed this link off of Discord of somebody's cat. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this. So I'm gonna grab this URL. Let's go back over to Xcode in our image view controller. Instead of the Picsum, for the URL, I'm going to put this really long Discord link. Let's go ahead and run our app one more time. And there we can see the picture. So depending on how we've decided to show this image and the frame size and things like this, you might want to make it for people's profile pictures that they've chosen. You can adjust how this is being shown to the user. Even if it's not that JSON picture, you can just use the exact URL, and these can be things that people upload to your app as well. If we tried to load a URL such as youtube.com here, let's see what happens in our app. We can see here that we get an error in our console, failed to load image, error domain, blah, blah, blah. So it's basically saying, hey, this is an image. You might want to have other use cases for this. If the user doesn't have an image, maybe something on the UI says, hey, image not found, invalid URL, things like that. Awesome. And if you're just curious on how to add images, that's all you need to know. But if you are wanting to use some online JSONs and kind of API information, this is something that we can really easily handle. What I would suggest doing is creating a new empty file, and I like to call this JSON or JSON Handler. And this is where we can handle those different API responses. So in my structure, I'm going to be doing a to-do list with a table view controller. So in this case, I'm going to be using the JSON placeholders. If you want to, you can use the link below, or you can go to jasonplaceholder.typecode.com. And this is a really good sample website to kind of play around with APIs. What we're going to be using this website for is to kind of faking different content that we would be getting from an API that you might be using. So you can even see that there's this try it here, run this code here in a console or from any site, right? There's the different resources. I'm going to be using the to-dos here. So if we click on that, we can kind of see that we have an ID and we also have a title as well as completed. Now, you don't have to use all of these. In my example, I'm going to be using the ID, the title, but not the user ID or the completed. So if we hop back on into Xcode, and what I'd recommend is for any API you're using, if it's like with this JSON, check what those different fields are first. We're going to create a structure here, and we're going to say to do, and this is going to be something that needs to be decodable. So we're going to make sure that it has an ID. So let ID, which is that integer, and let title, which is going to be a string. So if we go back here, ID, title. If you want to include the user ID and completed, feel free to do so. So this structure is going to match the expected API response. So different APIs are going to have different expectations. Next, we're going to fetch data asynchronously from a URL. So function fetch to-dos, call mine, and use our async throws. We're going to return an array of to-do. We'll then add our brace here. And now we're going to create the URL and ensure it's valid. If not, we're going to throw an error. Always handle your errors gracefully. And the guard let statement is so good at doing that. So our URL is going to equal the URL. We're going to make sure that we have a string here. And this is where we can include the API that we're using. In my case, I'm just going to be using the JSON placeholder to-dos. Go ahead and paste that in. We'll then have our else statement. Add a brace here. And we're going to go ahead and throw the URL error .bad URL that we were using before. Oh, this string does not need to be capitalized there. Cool. We also need to make sure that we are importing foundation. So this is at the top of our file. And just like with before, we're going to have our data, underscore within brackets equals try await URLSession.shared.data from the URL. So this essentially is going to perform a network request with async await, avoiding any completion handlers. And then let's go ahead and decode the JSON response into an array of to-do objects with our return. You can even see we're missing the return. Let's go ahead and return try JSON decoder, empty brackets, dot decode. And we're going to add brackets, and we're going to include our array of to-do dot self. And then we're going to make sure that it's from the data, which is what we've established above here. So this is our JSON decoder. First, we're defining the structure that matches expected API response. Then we're fetching the data asynchronously from a URL. We're handling those errors with those throws. And then we're going to be performing network requests with async await, avoiding completion handlers. Then in our return statement, we're decoding the JSON response into an array of different to-do objects. Wonderful. Because we have so much JSON data, I'm actually going to be putting my IDs and my titles into different tables. This is something you might want to do. You can display them in a list to the users. Totally up to you how you want to handle your different APIs. So I'm going to go to my main storyboard here. I'm going to press the plus button and I'm going to do a table view controller. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that onto the screen here. I'm also going to set it to be the initial view controller as well for testing. Now let's go over and create a new file from the template, the touch class, and let's go ahead and call this one table view controller. And instead of this being a regular UI view controller, we're going to set it to be a UITableView controller. So now we can go back here and set our custom class to our table view controller. Perfect. Okay, back in our Swift file, let's go ahead and create a variable of to-dos. And this is going to conform to our array of to-do, which is going to, for now, equal an empty array. And this is going to store any of our fetched data. In our override function viewDidLoad, we're going to take our table view and we're going to register the different cells for reuse. So I'm going to use the first option here. And for our nib, we're going to set this to be a UITableView cell.self. And then for the cell reuse identifier, I'm just going to call the cell. If you're dealing with an API with like fruits or vegetables or something like that, call it fruit cell, vegetable cell, right? It's a very generalized app, just calling these ones cell. Cool. And we're also using the async. So let's go ahead and create a task. And we're going to include our do right away. And this is going to be the self.todos equals try await. And then we're going to go ahead and fetch the to-dos. Then we're going to go to our table view dot reload data, and this is going to ensure that the UI is updated after fetching the data. After the do, let's create a catch for any of those nasty errors, and we'll go ahead and print the reason why failed to fetch to-dos, no, not dodos, to-dos. Then let's go ahead and display the error so we can really find out what's going on. Okay, after our view did load, we're going to be doing some additional setup. So we're going to go ahead and override a function of tableview. And I'm going to go ahead and use the number of rows in selection. Let's see if we can find that one. Did select row, number of row in selection. I had to scroll down a little bit here. If you can't find it and want to type it out, pause the video real quick, feel free to do so. But I'm going to use this to determine how many rows there are based on how many different to-dos we have. So I'm just going to go ahead and return the to-dos.count. So for every to-do that's available within the API, there's going to be an additional row. And we're also going to be overriding another function, override function, table view once more. And this time we're going to do the cell for row at. So it's going to ask the data source for a cell to insert in the particular location. Perfect for us because we need to be populating those cells in each of those rows with different information. So here we're going to create our cell. So let cell equals tableview dot dequeue reusable cell with identifier. And here is where we're going to be referencing that cell we created above. So if you have things for vegetables, fruits, right, mine's just called cell, make sure it's called the same. After the string, we're going to do comma 4 colon index path, and that's going to allow us to index through that large array. Next, we'll be able to update the text of it. So we're going to do the cell.text label, and we're going to use our question mark dot text equals to-dos. We're going to use our square brackets here, index path dot row dot title. Then we're going to go ahead and return the cell. So we're populating it with the text and the title, so we should be good to go. All of this information is just going to be grabbed from our JSON. Let's go ahead and make sure that this is our initial view controller. We have our table view. Let's go ahead and boot it up and see how we can grab all this random information from the API and display it neatly into a table for our user, all online, all with async. Now, if you're using different APIs, like in another video, I've done things with like the weather API where we had things like wind speed, we had things like the temperature outside, right? Make sure you're handling those cases based on what your API is passing to you. So here we can see we have so many different things. It's almost like the lorem ipsum, where it's just kind of a little bit of gibberish, but now this is all being populated into the table. At no point did I type all this out. This is all just different information available from this API. So if we go all the way to the top one here, we can see that the Delectus autem, again, this is just gibberish. We can see that it is the first item within our table, right? And then this one matches with this one. So you are able to kind of see that we're pulling this information from the API and then displaying it into a table. So this really simplifies the networking logic. There's no separate completion handlers, right? We basically say, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, go through the network request first. If there's any errors, tell me why, invalid URL, not connected to the internet, things like that. And it's going to handle the data. Once it is fully loaded, it will then display it to the user. So this ensures that UI updates only happen after data is fully loaded. So there is so much you can do with this information. Grab different things from the APIs, display images to users, different things like that. And this is also going to ensure that our app doesn't crash whenever network requests fail. This is how we can use JSONs for different APIs and things like that to load remote content into our app. If you found this useful, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one.